Hi, Concordia students. I'm Mireille Silcoff, and I have been asked by Ruth Panofsky, the editor of this fantastic new book on contemporary Jewish writing, The New Spice Box, to read my bit from it. It's a great anthology, and I'm really honored to be in it with so many other writers I truly admire and think are amazing and read all the time anyway. So you're in my home in the middle of coronavirus. Everything is super lame. If you get bored of listening to me, you can look at my bookshelves. Isn't that super? It's like Zoom 2021. Woo! Bookshelves, the star of the show. All right. So I'm going to read a bit from the story. The story is called Shalom Israel, Shalom Yisrael, and it's from my book Chez, which is my last work of fiction. Hold on. Let me get a copy. Here's the book. That's my book. And that story's in this book. This is the one that you're probably going to be using for your classes. And this is a short story that I wrote later in writing this book, Chez l'Arabe. I wrote a lot of the book when I was in deep, deep illness. And this story called, again, Shalom Israel, I wrote as I was starting to come out of illness, which, given our pandemic period, is actually an interesting story to look at now because I was basically a person in quarantine for a very long time. And this story kind of represents a protagonist who's very much like me, coming out of a quarantine and maybe not quite sure what to do with herself yet. At the same time, her mother's going through a kind of life passage as well. So you've got a mother and a daughter, both going through some kind of bat mitzvah in life, right? Some kind of milestone, some kind of passage. None of them too comfortable in their skin, neither of them too comfortable in their skin, and they end up living together for a certain amount of time. And this story just describes that moment, that slice of a few weeks or months or whatever it was, where these two women find themselves alone in a house together. So, I wouldn't say it's thinly veiled memoir at all, like none of this happened. But I will say that the protagonist in this book is very much like me and did suffer some of the illnesses that I had. And the mom is quite a bit like my Israeli mother, which interestingly, when the book came out, there was a lot about the overbearing mother character. And I had never thought of my mother as being overbearing. So I don't know what that says about me or other people or what people think about Jewish moms. But here we go. I'm not starting at the beginning because I've only got 20 minutes and I've already been blabbing. And I don't think I should take up 20 minutes because watching this for 20 minutes will make your eyes cross. So I'm going to start here. And if my phone rings or whatever, I'm just going to keep on going. So you've got a bit of the background. So when my mother moved in, her effect on my house was explosive and immediate. She fired the maid because she said she didn't like some extra body around the place all the time. She claimed the guest room with a detonation of clothes inside out on the floor and newspapers in Hebrew and open tubes of lipstick and spilling bottles of jojoba oil and the straps and the bands that are the effluvium of the contemporary fitness nut. She filled the fridge with beige tubs of eggplant in various states of puree. She left whatever novel she was reading face down in front of the toilet. Lately, this was one by a famous Israeli writer. Sorry, I'm looking at the time because I realized I didn't do that. Okay. Yep. A tragic tale about losing a child to war. I knew about the writer. In an excruciating turn, one that for a split second obliterates all rational ideas about the limits of parental influence, he'd lost his own son in Lebanon while writing the book. My mother and I were, at first, shocked at the happiness of our living arrangement. Perhaps afraid to rock our unlikely ark, we watched hours of television together, camping out in the carpeted den that used to be my husband's warren, a husband split. Sometimes with sandwiches on our knees, as delighted as young girls getting away with something. We watched all of the dance competition shows, my mother telling me which dancers had real training. The mom in the story is a former professional folk dancer, as was my mom. Israeli folk dancer. Telling me which dancers had real training and which had no chance. "This dancer is disgusting," she said of one. "Mom, she's not disgusting. She's just a little heavy." "No, she looks fat like an elephant," said my mother. "Mom, stop it. Be nice." "What nice? She's on stage." On one of the local channels, there was a commercial for an upcoming season of shows at Place des Arts, including a nostalgic song and dance stage spectacle for Israel's 60th birthday, entitled Shalom Israel. Shalom Israel. I looked it up on the internet. The show was created by the Israeli choreographer Ronen Chen, and on tour, it was stopping in Montreal for one night only. For my mother, it was major. My mother called Chen the man of my career. He was the one who had discovered her some 45 years earlier on a Tel Aviv beach, grabbing her by the ponytail and telling her about auditions. My mother knew all the performers in the Shalom Israel show. When the Place des Arts commercial came on again, she pointed mutely, bottlenecked by so much life stuff coming up. A few days later, my mother came into the kitchen dressed in her exercise clothes. "I am making a power walk to the box office," she announced. I'm going to leave the accent for now. I could go on with the accent, but I think I won't. If only because my mother will kill me if she ever sees this video. "I am making a power walk to the box office," she announced, putting her leg up on a chair to fasten the Velcro on an ankle weight. "What box office?" "At Place des Arts. I want for us tickets to the Israel show." "Isn't that a bit far for a walk?" I asked. "Don't worry," said my mother, zipping up a leather fanny pack. This was before fanny packs were fashionable again, ignoring my words about slippery sidewalk sleet and too many kilometers. "I'm going to buy the cheapest tickets for the show." Buying the cheapest tickets was my mother's favorite trick. Pay for a nosebleed seat and then move to a better one that had remained vacant after the show's start. "You know, last year I sat in the front row of the Barber of Seville for $15, said my mother. Barber of Seville didn't have an audience filled with other Israelis planning on doing exactly the same thing, I answered. "So we'll be more quick," said my mother, forgetting my slowness, my story, the wheelchair folded in the coat closet, still too fresh from use to give away just yet. Later that afternoon, I found my mother sitting in the kitchen with her ankle weights loose on the table, along with a ticket envelope from Place des Arts. I looked at the tickets, X48 and X46. My mother was staring out the window, her face ashen. It was a gloomy, northy 5 p.m., cold and salt gray. My mother was holding a heating pad to her right shoulder and a bag of frozen peas to her left knee. She actually looked rueful. I stood awkward in the kitchen doorway, unused to seeing her like this. What was it? Melancholy? Something having to do with thinking and feeling at the same time. Usually, she moved too fast for that sort of thing. "Did you get good tickets to the show?" I asked. "No," she said, her voice like a puddle. "Well, I'm excited," I said, lying. My mother shrugged and then winced her shoulder. "For you, it's normal to be in the audience. You know, if you hadn't moved to Canada, Mom, you'd be on stage in the show for sure," I said. I put on a waxy announcer's voice. "And now, presenting the star of Shalom Israel 2009, the lovely..." "Of course I would," said my mother, fussing with her heating pad. "This is not a question that I would." "Then there's nothing to regret." "I don't regret. I don't like talking about this. About the past, it's already finished. There's nothing to talk about in the past." My mother was never a fan of memory in general. Of her past, she relayed little to me as a child. Where she'd come from, where she'd been. I only knew a toy history, a jack-in-the-box phoenix from ashes. How she'd been saved from a trap of filthy poverty by her body's physical brilliance. How at the stroke of 16, her dancing had freed her from her mother's cruel and unhealthy apartment. Not surprisingly, my mother had never been any good at keeping photos properly. In the basement of her house, she only had a couple of coming-apart shoeboxes stuffed with a disarray of decades. Frilly-edged color shots of her as a Tel Aviv beach babe stuck on the back of ancient black and whites of shocked-looking people off a boat from Russia. Me at 6, toothless and grinning in a red snowsuit, hanging by a loop of dry tape to a picture of my mother as my father's bride, her hair freshly cut for her Canadian wedding into a curled under pudding bowl style. I'm going to read for 5 more minutes. Over the years, I'd taken a few of the pictures I liked most from my mother's neglected stash, making small, ordered collections for myself. I want to show you something, I now said, leaving the kitchen for the oak cupboard in the hall, taking a string-tied packet from the drawer and rushing back to the table before my mother lost interest. It was a series of pictures of my mother in a black leotard and a high ponytail on the sand, probably promotional shots. She's such a knockout in the photos. I used to keep one in my wallet to impress upon a certain sort of boyfriend just what type of genetic pool they were dealing with. I actually did that. I used to keep a photo of my mom in a bathing suit, like on the mantelpiece. So weird. Look at my waist, said my mother, shuffling through the black and white photographs, nodding at her figure. She then stopped to peel off a small colored snapshot stuck to one of the leotard pictures. This one is something different, she said. This is a different time. This is not Tel Aviv. This is Miami. On inspection, it looked like Miami. My mother reclining poolside on a chair made of orange plastic spaghettis, pecan brown in a yellow knit bikini, her meters of hair rolled atop her head in a bun the size of an American car turbine. She's staring straight at the camera and lying next to a man who is looking at her. His hair is brushed back into a small bouffant. He wears short trunks. This is Ronen Chen, said my mother, taking the photo and holding it in front of her face, her eyes round past the picture's edges. This is in Miami. This is when we were in Miami. I nodded. I wondered if my mother knew that I knew about the time this picture was taken. I knew about my mother and Ronen Chen in Miami. The Miami story was related to me by my mother's sister in Tel Aviv, offered in consolation one weepy afternoon during a teenage summer of lovesickness, boys coming and going, waves crashing on the beach. Before flying back to Canada, I'd asked my aunt for the story 2 more times, my own heart pain mitigated by the story of my mother's. The story takes place during the last section of a 6-month world tour. Ronen Chen had by then asked my mother to marry him. She said no. Her life was only just beginning. Inside herself, she believed there would be many other loves like Ronen Chen. I remember thinking that too. Now I'm 48, and I know the truth. I know more truth. I know the sad truth. The dancers were painting a thick stripe along the North American East Coast, beginning in Montreal, where the newspapers called the Chen Israeli folkloric dance troupe peace ambassadors from a country at war, and raved about the barefoot lead dancer with the ponytail that grazed the deeply curved small of her back. My father had been only one of her backstage courtiers in the city. She accepted his invitation for a late dinner on a whim. Nerdy and awkward, having read books on dating etiquette, he took her out for steak Diane in a dark French restaurant downtown. He urged that they drink a strong drink before the meal, and after the meal, a sweet liqueur. Between those, he ordered a bottle of red wine just for the 2 of them. My mother was unused to liquor, and I imagine my father confused my mother's fine bone structure with experience. Had he known of her deep virginity, he likely would not have pressed on to her hotel. So I'm going to stop there, but I will encourage you to read on if you do pick up this wonderful collection, the New Spice books. And see that it's basically a story that's not just a Jewish story, clearly, a story of mothers and daughters, and who gets more energy at any one time. You know, is there a finite amount in a relationship like that? And if one takes more, does the other get less, and vice versa? So that's it for me today. I wish you good studies. I wish you great Judaism. I want you to know that it's morning, and I am such a deeply Jewish person that my laptop is actually sitting atop a bit of toasted pita, which my children had for breakfast. And bye, everyone. This was fun.